Sheriff Creech, how are you?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm doing swimmingly. I'm glad we got rolling here. We've been chatting for a while. You are the sheriff in Payette County, correct?
Correct.
Awesome. There are a lot of things going on with law enforcement, a number of them. But one thing that you came in today to talk about is the upgrading of our 911 emergency system, which is awesome, as well as the relationship with ICE and immigration happenings in general in the state of Idaho, because there are a lot of states that are specifically like border states, right? Like Arizona and Texas that are saying, hey, we are not being sufficiently served by the federal government with defending our state borders from illegal immigrants. But as it stands right now, ICE is a federal agency, and you don't have all the capacities of state. So there's a push for that. But let's do this. Let's start with a 911 upgrade. So the state of Idaho has a 911 system like everybody else does, but we're also using cell phones and things like that ping off different cell towers. And there are problems with this ultimately when it comes down to being able to respond in an efficient time frame.
Yeah, so the 911 system was actually built back in 1968. It's built on, if you Google that, there'll be this, I think it's, maybe out in the eastern part of the state where they made that first 911 call. Picture of a guy there with a rotary phone, and he's on the phone calling 911 for the first call. And when you look at that, like that's on a copper line that's hooked from his phone to the wall, through the ground to the 911 center where that ended up at. And this 911 that we use in Idaho is still based on that copper line, that trunk system, those selective routers. And that was a long time ago. And the reality is that those things are failing. And when you look at construction nowadays, they're not even putting those copper lines in. And so when we start having failures with these copper lines, we're still using them. It's hard to get them replaced, maintained, if you needed more of them, and trying to get them added. And we're just trying to move this out of that ancient technology into what people think that we already can do. Like when you think about trying to get an Uber right now off your phone, you're going to get a whole lot better location services from your phone to that Uber than you will from 911. And so like when you're calling 911 and you don't know where you're at, we don't either. And we have an idea if all the information comes through. But just in January, there was a family that called 911 up in Valley County, and they had a baby that wasn't breathing, and they needed an ambulance, but they didn't know where they were at. And so they called like 7 times, talked to a dispatcher every time, but their location never came through. They use like this triangulation method, so it gets you in the area, but doesn't actually get you to the place, but it never came through. They use a separate program, and on that program, they were able to get that location eventually and send help. But in our day and age right now, I mean, this is just crazy. You ought to be able to, on your cell phone, because like 90% of the calls come from your cell phone, you ought to be able to call 911 and we ought to be able to find you. You think about people who can't talk and they're calling 911 because they need help because of that, this is just a failed system. And we need to be looking at doing this. We've talked about this for several years now. I think it was back in 2011 when the Idaho Public Safety Communications Commission put this as a priority. And we've been working through that commission for years now with our grant funds to help move Idaho in that direction. But the reality is we need a heavy lift on revenue to make it happen. We're talking, minimum of $22 million a year to get it implemented and then to pay all the maintenance fees and contracts to keep it going. But the reality is that when you talk to citizens, they just expect that call is going to go through.
Okay. Understood on that. What for the millions of dollars, what would actually happen? Like how would that upgrade happen? Would you essentially just modernize all of the receptacle technology? So essentially when somebody calls in, because I remember I called 911 like when I was a kid. It was not a good idea. Like dial 911 and you hang up.
Hang up.
And of course they like star 69 you. They're like, did you call? Is there an emergency? I'm like, oh no, it was my little brother. Click. I don't have a little brother. I was the youngest. But my point is like, I made a lot of bad decisions, but they had the requisite technology to obviously identify where and call back. Is that essentially what you would be doing for the 911 systems, which is like, hey, we need to be able to identify who's calling, like ping geo services? Is that something that like the consumer would have to turn on their phone? So, things of that nature, how would that work?
So what we're really going to do is we're going to get rid of all that old equipment that's in the middle.
Okay.
The technicians are getting to the point where it's getting like it seems harder for them to be able to work on this stuff and keep it running. And so we're going to get rid of all that stuff in the middle. Right now, when you call 911, it goes into this thing called a selective router. That selective router drops into a database called an IMSAG, a Master Street Address Guide. When phones were hooked to walls, we knew where every phone was located. We knew the address and we knew who owned it. And so we knew what your house address was and your phone number there and that phone. And so there was a database with all that information to it. It'd go into that database and it'd say, oh, well, this is so-and-so is calling and this is where they live. And it would say, well, this is the dispatch center we sent it to. Well, now when you call 911, that call goes through a cell tower, and that cell tower has an address, and that address exists in this master street address guide. And so when the selective router dips into that, it says, oh, it's on this tower, and it has that address, so it must be going to this county. But then when you run in a county like mine where there's just a river that separates like Fruitland, Idaho from Ontario, Oregon, and there's cell towers on both sides. And so if you call 911 in Fruitland, you got a really good chance that you're going to go to Oregon. And if you're in Ontario and it happens to be right in their business section, call 911 right there, there's a good chance you're coming to Payette. And then when you get to the wrong dispatch center, you waste minutes and minutes. Like you're in an emergency. That's why you're calling 911. And we're asking you all these questions trying to figure out where you're at, so we can transfer you to a whole nother dispatch center so that you can answer all them same questions again. And this is going to change it to where it's geo-based, like GIS. So this will actually take, as you call 911, it'll grab that location off your phone and send that location with it. Right now, the location we get kind of on the side has nothing to do with call routing, is triangulated from multiple cell towers. And they say your phone is at this location. There's an error of, there's kind of an error of where you're actually at in that, from that location. And we get that on the side, so we have an idea where you're at. But this will actually use the location on your phone, which is much more accurate. It'll put it into the GIS map and then like pinpoint it.
Oh,
and then
it'll drop a pin.
It'll like drop a pin, and if you're in the pin that's in my county, you're coming to my county. And if you're across the river into Malheur County, you're going to Malheur County. And it's going to really take out all of that stuff and modernize the whole thing. And then it'll help with the call routing. It'll save some time, and then we'll be able to actually tell where people are at a whole lot more accurately than what we do today.
Man, sounds like it. What a nightmare.
It's really difficult. I've prior to being sheriff, I was administrator over our dispatch, and being up there and helping them and working and watching them work up there. Our technology is so old and it's just antiquated, and it really makes it hard for them to do their job. And, when people are calling 911, they barely can remember their name, much less where they're at. They're in the middle of emergency and they need help. And we need the technology so that we can help them. And that's really what we're trying to do.
Gotcha. With this, there's a price tag that comes along. Who pays for that, and how does it get funded?
Yeah, so, in Idaho, the path that we've taken is back in 1988 when, we still were just barely rolling out 911, basic 911 in Idaho. Because it was like an unfunded mandate from the federal government, and they said, you can create this, but there's no money for it.
Sure.
And so back in 1988, they instituted a surcharge fee. So per phone, everybody pays $1.
Sure.
And per month. And that dollar's still the dollar. And so we've never increased.
From 88, it was $1. Now it's still $1.
It's still $1.
Fantastic.
And then in about 2009 or so, we started this grant program at the state level through the Idaho Public Safety Communications Commission, and that added $0.25 if the counties opted in. Currently, all counties except for Ada County and Bonneville County opt in. And there's a few cities too that have dispatch centers. They've opted in as well. And so since about 2009, there's $0.25. That's still $0.25. That's never been increased.
That's not a lot of money.
It's really not. When you look at
1988, $1 got you a lot, a lot. Compared to now, it's like, I mean, I don't even know. It's like, do we still have a dollar menu at like the fast food places?
I don't think it's $1.
We used to have a dollar menu, right?
Yeah.
Like, I think it was Carl's Jr. had like this really robust dollar menu. And, when I was in high school, McDonald's had the 29-cent hamburger. That was like, I think that was like 96,
right.
29-cent hamburger, 39-cent cheeseburger on Tuesdays,
yeah.
It's like you could get something for $1 back in the day. Now it's
$1
like,
nothing.
yeah, right.
Yeah. And it's never increased. And that's really what we've been looking at. But I think if you couple that along with like Idaho is the absolute lowest in their excise tax on phones too. We're absolute lowest. If you doubled the excise tax, we'd still be the lowest. And so like there's probably more than one way to skin this cat. Like there's some other way that we can fund this maybe. And it doesn't really matter to the sheriffs and to the cities that have dispatch centers. It really doesn't matter to us how it's funded. What matters is that it gets funded somehow.
Yeah.
There's not enough money today currently to do what we're doing. There's a lot of things that we work around trying to give the best service we can to our counties. And so there's more than just the next gen 911 that we need to be implementing, but we need to do something to at least get that in place.
I got you. Let's move on. And again, I try to be sensitive. When we're out of session, I'll have to grab you for like a nice long conversation, but I know you're in the middle of, workday and stuff. Moving on to the immigration issue. Help me understand this. I understand the broad strokes, which is, hey, we need to give more power to the state of Idaho to deal with illegal immigrants and criminals and things of that nature. But there are a lot of problems with this because, again, when it comes down to citizen verification and ICE, that's a federal kind of thing, asking you to perform those services with the resources you have in play and the rights that people have. That's a very tricky situation. Arizona attempted to do something like this. That got shot down in the courts. Texas is still fighting through something similar to this. That is currently in the courts. And Idaho is trying to implement things as well. Can you walk me back through, obviously, the problem and then what these individual states have done and how what Idaho is doing a little differently?
Sure. When you look at the Idaho Sheriff's Association stance that we've put out a letter here in January about it, and even we've been working with legislature up here to look at House Bill 83 and Senate Bill 1039 especially. But as we're looking at those things, like over the last 4 years, we've seen what we categorize as just an open border where people just basically walked across.
Sure.
And the thing that we're concerned about is the people coming up here and committing crimes. And so that's really where our focus has been, is on the people that are committing crimes and wanting to get them deported. And I think you've seen over the last 4 years that there was a lot of people that just weren't getting deported or removed from our country, and the 4 years prior to that, or all the time prior to that, they did get done, especially when they had crimes here in Idaho. We've seen a big difference and change in just this last couple months in that position, but we're still focused on that. We want the people up here committing crimes that are here, they're undocumented, they're not here legally. We want those people to be deported. And then we really feel like we have a history of working with ICE through our jail system, especially where when they're getting booked in, and there's a part of the booking process where we help identify the people who appear to be undocumented. We don't have the ability to check and see whether or not they have the proper documents to be here or not. There's so many different visa programs and stuff like that. We don't really have the ability to know. But if there's somebody that appears like they don't have the right documents to be here, we'll call up ICE and say, hey, can you come and look at this person? They'll come in and they'll interview them, and then they'll go through and check their systems. And then if they want to put a detainer on them, they do. And we work with them on getting them transferred over to their custody once their local charges are finished. And we're really just trying to work with them on these things so that we can help them with people that are here committing crimes.
And we don't, and correct me if I'm wrong, but well, let me just ask you, do we have a current issue? Like the state of Texas has an issue and has been very much in the spotlight for years with them trying to protect their borders, feeling like the federal agencies are not successfully supporting them and giving them the capacity to do it. They have a real problem. Do we have a problem in the state of Idaho with, like mass influxes of legal immigrants that are also committing crimes and like all these other, like, do we have that currently existing in the state?
One of the things that you'll see like the cartels that come up here and do their work up here, and you got people that are like mules that are carrying up drugs and getting that into our counties and our communities, and those things can be, whether you're talking about the drug crime or the violent crime, those things are occurring in our community. And so while those states that are right down there on the border are definitely seeing the front line of that every day. If they get through there and past there, those people are making it up here and affecting us. And maybe it's not everybody's crossing that border, but there are quite a few that'll make it up here, and that does affect us in our communities.
With that taken into account, do you see a flaw in the current mechanisms in place, which is like, hey, we have ICE, and once we finish processing local issues, we transfer these people to ICE. They're allowed to check these things. Do you see like a bottleneck in your county with kind of like, hey, it would really be beneficial if I could just take over all the powers that ICE has or have analogous powers to engage with this kind of verification?
We'd rather not. I mean, just, there's kind of a line between what's a federal law and what's a state law, and we don't enforce federal laws. Matter of fact, there's a bunch of federal laws that we have state laws that says that we can't enforce those. And so anytime that there's a question about us starting to enforce federal laws, Idaho hasn't done it, and we don't think it's constitutional for us to start weighing in on federal laws. The best thing we can do is work with ICE. And I think part of this is what comes up is that I think you can say in Idaho that there's opinion that we didn't like the way that ICE was working and over the last several years. And so now it's like we want to make sure and be hands-on in this. But for the Sheriff's Association, like our position is that we'd like to work with ICE and we'd like to support them, but the federal government needs to deal with their immigration problems.
Gotcha. That makes sense. What did Arizona attempt to do that got shut down, and what is Texas doing that's slightly different, that's also getting held up in courts?
So I don't know them inside and out. I know that that there's concerns about the supremacy clause, and so with the supremacy clause, we're really
beholden to federal laws.
Yeah. And that's been a lot of the problem where like they're trying to create like state laws for us to enforce. The Idaho law that we're looking at, it creates a misdemeanor and a felony. Interesting enough, the Idaho law won't go into effect. You won't be guilty of it until you won't be in violation of it until after you're charged with a crime here. But the hard part is even if you're charged with a crime here and then we arrest you on that crime and then we charge this new crime on you, the evidence we're completely reliant on ICE to provide because we don't know if they're legal or illegal, if they're documented or undocumented. Because we don't.
So you're trying to convict somebody or trying to apply a law to them without in the absence of evidence. So you have to do that before you could even start the process of giving the evidence that would prove your case.
Yeah. So it's not like something you would do.
Interesting.
You wouldn't do this beside the road.
Yeah.
We wouldn't pull you over and then ask you for your visa, and then when you don't provide it to us, then enforce this law. So it's much more involved than that.
So, okay, and to be clear, you're saying the law that we're dealing with right now in question would make a misdemeanor and a felony, but you wouldn't be guilty of that felony unless you commit a different crime. So it's like, say I'm an illegal immigrant and I'm just bumbling around. This law would not say, okay, Matt is already a felon just by his mere existence here illegally. It would have to be Matt's bumbling around. I commit a crime. I'm actually convicted of that crime. And then you're like, you have now been convicted of a crime. You're an illegal immigrant. We're also going to layer on these other convictions or charges on top of that because now you de facto are guilty of this other felony. Is that kind of accurate?
That's accurate. One of the things we had talked with them about, and it's included in the bill as well, is adding like a sentencing enhancement. So if it's really our focus is on the people that are up here committing crimes and victimizing our people here. And so one of the things we talked with them and they included in there was that if you're committed of a crime here, then there's an automatic enhancement on your sentence because you're here illegally.
Right. So if you would have got, 3 to 5 years, now it's going to be like 7 to 10.
Right.
Yeah.
And just to help, discourage those type of people from being here.
Right. And crime.
And crime. Yeah.
It's like, be whatever kind of person. That's not necessarily true, right? Like we want not be whatever kind of person. You can it's my understanding that there is a significant population of illegal immigrants in the state of Idaho right now, predominantly engaged in agriculture, hospitality, and construction, right? And if those people are not committing crimes, you guys are not going out saying like, okay, we need to find the person who's working in this ag or the dairy or the construction site. Like we're not going out intentionally trying to find those people. We're trying to find people that are criminals, both illegal U.S. citizens and illegal aliens.
Right. And that's really what our goal is. We're not we're not wanting to go out and we're not wanting to canvass places and, start going through dairies or going through construction sites or any other place and
Show
start
me your
asking
papers and stuff. Can you even, is that legal for you to, just go somewhere in the absence of a crime and ask somebody to produce a citizenship documentation?
No, we need to be investigating some kind of a crime or something to even begin to start. We certainly can walk up to somebody on the side of the road and ask them who they are, and they can either tell us or not, but we need to have a reason to compel them, and so we can't just be going out and doing that. That's not in our purview. And so that's not our intent either. I mean, we're looking for the people that are committing crimes. And I understand from talking with different associations and people in my community that there are people here that are undocumented, they're working, they're contributing. Those people aren't the people we're targeting. We're looking for the people that are victimizing our communities and that are committing crimes. And them are the ones that we're really concerned about.
Gotcha. That makes sense. And what's this bill number, the immigration one?
So House Bill 83 is the one that looks like it's moving through. It's been through the House side. It's on the Senate side right now, and they've sent it to the amending order, and they're kind of blending together Senate Bill 1039 and House Bill 83 together. It's in the amending order now. It should be coming out and going to the floor for its debate, and then because of the amendment, it'll go back to the House side for them to approve of the amendment.
Gotcha. Sheriff, again, working day. I really appreciate these two nuggets. Is there anything we've missed regarding 911 and the immigration?
Well, with 911, we have a hearing coming up with JLOC, the Joint Legislative Oversight Committee, this Friday, and we're going to be asking for an OPE report on 911, and really just trying to engage that legislature for a third year, trying to find some way that we can move this forward. We feel like 911 is near a failure point. And I think that it would be catastrophic if that failure point happened in any county, much less one of our large counties. And then with the immigration stuff, we just are going to keep watching that. We have some concerns about nuances in the bill. We definitely want the federal government to fix the immigration issue. There are people that wait for years to try to go through it legally, and there's some real problems with the federal immigration system. We want them to fix that. And we want to be able to deport or assist ICE, and so that we can deport people out of here that are here doing criminal acts and causing our citizens to be victims. And that's really what we're focused on.
I dig. Thank you for taking the time today. Thank you for coming in. Let's do it again.
All right. I look forward to it.